Shalom, everyone, and welcome to the ICEJ's webinar series. We're doing two webinars again this week. Yesterday, we talked to Dr. Mordechai Kadar about the future of Gaza. He's an Arab affairs, Islamic scholar, and really incredible information that he gave us, even told us why Hamas attacked specifically on October 7th, even why the terrorists attacked the trade towers in New York on September 11. Just fascinating insights. I encourage you to go to our YouTube page and our Facebook page to see yesterday's webinar. Today, our second in the series, the Christian Embassy presents UNRWA, the Facilitator of Hamas. UNRWA, of course, being the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, specific UN agency set up for Palestinian refugees ever since the 1949 after the War of Independence. And today I've asked our guest David Bedeen to be with us. David is, I think he was trained as a social worker, but he became an investigative journalist. Many things that you see out there in public, sometimes he is behind rooting out the real story of the Palestinian Authority, of Hamas, and especially of UNRWA. He specialized particularly in this UN agency, its corruption and its complicity in terror. He has the Israel Resources News Agency and also Israel Behind the News website. Good to have you, David.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Okay, we've been friends since the early 90s when I was in Washington working with CPAC, Richard Hellman, and I just know you take deep dives and you get behind the scenes to really root out the real information, and it's really good to have you here to talk about UNRWA. Can you tell us a little more about it? Created as a special agency to deal with Palestinian refugees after the 1948 War of Independence. The UN never cared about all the Jewish refugees from all the Arab lands kicked out of their lands, never gave a penny, but somehow a sui generis, a unique refugee, treated differently than any other refugee problem in the world. Almost, you'd have to say, by singling this out, it's really an anti-Semitic institution.
Well, it's more than that. Thank you again for having me on your program. I've been studying the issue of UNRWA since 1987. I was inspired at my Jewish high school in Philadelphia in 1967, so it's after the war. Our teacher said, you know, the refugees are in our hands now. They're not in not necessarily the Arab world, and now we can do something about it. And a few years later, in 1970, I came to Israel, and I was dreaming of working on this issue when I got my social work degree, and in 1987 started a project to follow what's happening in UNRWA. And little did I know that the week after we began this office, the Intifada, the rebellion, broke out. And the idea of the rebellion in the refugee camps, in 59 Arab refugee camps, was not freedom or something. It was right of return by force of arms. Now, the guy who actually conceptualized the idea of UNRWA was a man named Khanfark Bernadette, who was the UN mediator. And he didn't like Israel's first law, which was the law of return. So he created the right of return through UNRWA. That's
the guy
ever since. It wasn't
assassinated.
an Arab idea, it was a Swedish idea. I have to emphasize that.
He was assassinated near the Jerusalem Theater.
That's correct. That's correct. I don't know what role he played in that play, but he certainly had a few bullet wounds which silenced him for life. Mm-hmm. And we didn't hear anything from him ever since. Not only from him, but the Swedish government has been angry ever since at Israel. Mm-hmm. But what's very important to understand is the systematic inculcation of the idea in the minds of every Arab child that he has to go back to where he come from, even if the Arab villages no longer exist. And they could have taken the model of UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which is the regular agency that handles refugees, and systematically plan for a future. But that's not what they did. And as you said in your introduction, this is not only an anti-Semitic issue, but it's a war on the Jews issue. And what our agency has been doing, and you can see our work at Israel Behind the News UNRWA.com. You can see we've made 24 movies. We produced 2 books. We produced 45 studies of UNRWA. So we've been following this for a while. We also were the people who exposed to the U.S. Congress and to the Canadian Parliament the issue of the Hamas takeover of UNRWA in 2007, when there were elections in the unions of UNRWA, and what happened was the UNRWA allowed anyone who wanted to run for it, and Hamas took over in the area of 85-90% of the electorate inside UNRWA. Now we're talking about, it's very important to understand, this is not simply a refugee, a terrorist organization. This is a terrorist organization with a popular backing. And the new school books that were introduced by the Palestinian Authority and adopted by UNRWA, and we have gone through all of the school books. We did so with an open mind. I even met Arafat, the PLO head, who gave me the permission to go through the books. He said, "You will find words of peace." Well, a certain synagogue offered us $10,000 to find any words of peace, and sent it to them, and we couldn't do that. And I didn't get my $10,000, but I maintained my integrity, because then it is one long diatribe of war. Now we have 4 experts working with them, Arabs and Jews, working on the textbooks. We've been working on them since that time, since they first came out in 2000. And we've had some surprises, because we knew it wasn't going to be peaceful, but we had no idea that they would have a whole seminar, a whole book devoted to the legacy of Dalala Mughrabi, a woman who murdered 36 Jews. Now, this is not something to be expected in a school book, especially since it's under the aegis of the United Nations, UN Relief and Works Agency. Now, this is something that, again, I have more copies of this, and we have what's important here is this is also analyzed on our site, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. We translated it, we presented it to various parliaments, and after we presented this at the United Nations in 2018 to the UN, the head of the UN, Guterres, he gave an order to UNRWA to remove the book, and they did remove the book. And guess what? UNRWA brought it back 4 months ago. It's a school book dedicated to teaching children on the importance of murdering Jews. Now, in case
you gave me a copy of that, I gave it to a member of the Parliament of the Netherlands. I think back in April. You have several copies of that. I appreciate it.
Well, the owners, they're very pleased to sell it to me. That's how they make their living. But what's most important here is the designation at the back of the book, 2023, to make sure everyone knows it's been republished, renewed, and they don't care. Now, our agency has been a voice in the wilderness for the last 36 years. We also produced a book which people can order through us, The Roadblock to Peace. And again, it rejects any kind of a two-state solution. It rejects any kind of connection with the Jews, denying Israel's connection to Jerusalem, denying Israel's connection, the Jews' connection to the land of Israel. Very, very clear. Now, the Roadblock to Peace, which we have here, is supported without any hesitancy by all the nations of the world. Now, there's good news, which I can mention to your viewers. You'll be about one of the first people to hear this, is that the United States adopted a new contract with UNRWA, that they can't use the money that they give them until they change the curriculum. Well, we sent our journalists to UNRWA, and they said, we're not changing the curriculum. And so guess what? For the last 2 years, they haven't gotten their money. Now, this is a sign that when you work properly...
President Trump cut off the funds. The Biden administration is resuming it, but setting conditions.
That's correct. Whereas Trump stopped the funds completely, and that inspired Germany and the UK to increase their funds. I don't know if Biden himself was involved with this process, but someone sensitive around Biden put in this conditional agreement, and that's being reinforced. Now, people who are watching this program can turn to Congress right now. What the Biden administration is trying to do is to reverse that process. The Biden administration right now, as we're speaking, is trying to, in the months, the weeks, as December is beginning, they're trying to reverse the process and give UNRWA the responsibility to handle Gaza, where 2 million residents who go to UNRWA camps are to be found. in the wake of the war, that UNRWA should resume, and with no changes in the curriculum. Now, there is the U.S. What I grew up in America, and there is something called due process there, which is very important. And so the U.S. has already made it clear that they will not renew the funding until they change their school books. But now the Biden administration is trying to reverse that. And you, as constituents, as you're watching this program, you can look at my website. Everything's there. I don't want you to believe it because of my good looks. You can see on the site, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. There's a search engine. Write the word UNRWA next to the word Hamas, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And you'll see also the curriculum. It's very clear. There is no ifs, ands, and buts about what's being taught. Now, in order to seeing is believing, we have an audio-visual aspect of our work. We go out and meet the children in the UNRWA camps, and we film them. We film their schools. So, Dave, why don't we take a moment and look at a 7-minute movie that we made only 2 months ago, actually 2.5 months ago, in the Askar UNRWA refugee camp. I was inspired to go to Askar because my neighbor, Rabbi Leo D., his wife and 2 children were murdered by people from Askar while they were on a main artery in Israel. And what they did was to name a school, name a refugee camp, name a summer camp in memory of the murderers. So take a look just for 7 minutes, sit back, watch this, understand what's going on, and we publicize what we find. If we found our UNRWA children speaking words of peace, we would publicize it tomorrow morning. That's not what we find. So let's take a look at these 7 minutes.
Okay. Right before we do that, let me just tell everyone why this is so relevant right now with the Gaza war. For decades, since 1949, UNRWA has been responsible for the welfare of Palestinian refugees, a special treatment that even the descendants of refugees are considered refugees. Their roles have expanded to over 5 million Palestinian refugees in camps in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza. And in Gaza, since Hamas has been there in total power since 2006, 2007, they have put their curriculum in the UNRWA schools, embedding and brainwashing people with this death cult of Hamas, and that to allow UNRWA to continue there, like the US, like the Arab countries want, and the UN itself, is just going to create another generation of terrorists. But this Aksar camp is in Judea, Samaria. It's up in the Shomron near Nablus, just east of Nablus. It's a small camp, David, but it's, I've heard of Balata, the one in Jenin that produces a lot of suicide bombers, but this Askar produces a higher rate of terrorists than any other community. UNRWA's there, and here's why you have that. Please, can you roll
One more comment before we see the movie. Yeah. Understand, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have exactly the same curriculum. It's the curriculum used by the PA, and that's and UNRWA. What's very important to understand: Israel can't get rid of Hamas without also getting rid of the PA, and that is we're speaking during the days that the U.S. Secretary of State is coming to Israel and telling Israel 2 things: one, give more power, and number 2, empower the Palestinian Authority, and that is a death wish for Israel. So don't believe from my words. See this movie, take a look at it, and look at the other 24 movies on our site. Go ahead.
No difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. They both call for the eradication of
Understand that this is not something emphasized in the media or by any organization pro-Israel. That that UNRWA is made up of Hamas and the PA. Hamas reports to the PA, not to Tehran. That is not the case. Israel is not under attack from Tehran. Israel is under attack from the Palestine Liberation Organization, which parades as the Palestinian Authority, which has a kind of a credible sound to it, doesn't it? Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
The Askar refugee camp, located on the outskirts of Nablus, is one of 19 Palestinian refugee camps in Judea and Samaria, controlled and maintained by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which benefits from a whopping budget of $1.6 billion, flowing from 67 donor countries and 33 international NGOs. 58% of that budget funds the UNRWA school system, which emphasizes and promotes the right of return as the underlying principle for its operations, its very reason for being.
احنا تهجرنا من يافا واليوم جايين نحكي عن حقنا بالعودة وبنكافح لحد ما نرجع لأراضينا في يافا وأراضينا بحيفا والليل والرملة، إنه راح نرجع قريبا جدا. لو شو ما يصير مش راح يصير سلام. السلام بدناش إياه.
شو بيعلموكم عن حق العودة بالمدارس؟
عطشنا واحنا مشروع شهادة كلنا، واحنا ولازم ندافع عن وطننا كتير، راح ناخذ حقنا والله ينتقم منهم ان شاء الله يموتوا كلهم. القدس عاصمة فلسطين وراح تضلها لنا، مش راح تتغير، راح تضلها لنا. المستوطنين اللي فيها كلهم راح ينتخوا.
يا توتة الدار صبرك عالزمان انجار، لابد ما نعود مهما طول المشوار، يابا 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 يابا.
وحابة أقول لكم إنه مفتاح العودة لساته معنا، وراح نفتح يوم من الأيام في بيوتنا.
مثل إني بتعلم بجهدي وحق إني آخذ وطني ونحرر فلسطين، يعني الناس الشهداء يعني بيقدروا يحرروا فلسطين إذا بنضلهم هيك.
أنا نور المسيمة مديرة نادي أشبال العاصفة. إحنا كل سنة اللجنة الوطنية بتعمل نوادي صيفية في مخيم عسكر. قسمنا الأطفال ل4 مجموعات حتى بأسماء شهدائنا في مخيم عسكر، أساسهم يضلوا حاضرين في ذهنهم وفي أفكارهم ويتعلموا منهم البطولة ويضلهم مستمرين في درب المقاومة. وفي عندهم يعني كل طفل مستعد يكون مشروع شهيد مقابل إنه يحافظ على المبادئ اللي إحنا مترسخة عنا، حقنا في العودة، وإن شاء الله انتفاضة أقوى جاية، وهدول أطفالنا هم اللي راح يقودوها.
The delusion of refugees going back to homes they left in the wake of the 1948 war, homes which are long gone, has turned into the source, the motivation, and the promoter of the armed rebellion against the Jews. Askar is the smallest of the refugee camps in Judea and Samaria, yet stands out as the camp with the highest amount of Palestinians engaged in terror activity in relation to the number of its inhabitants, including the highest number of shaheeds, armed terrorists killed in the act of murder, and the largest number of convicts serving life imprisonment for murder.
مخيم مقاتل، مخيم مقاوم، مخيم يقدم الشهيد تلو الشهيد، ومن جميع الأطياف ومن جميع الأعمار ومن جميع التوجهات.
From this refugee camp embarked the Palestinian assassin of brothers Hillel and Yagel Yaniv from Har Bracha, who were killed driving through UNRWA in February 2023. It was also home to a 15-year-old terrorist who set out this past April from Askar, armed with a gun, shooting and severely injuring 2 Jews in Jerusalem. Askar is also home to the 3-man terrorist squad who, on April 7th, 2023, murdered Lucy D. and her 2 daughters, 15-year-old Reena and 20-year-old Maya, in a drive-by shooting. The perpetrators of these heinous killings are hailed today as heroes in the Askar refugee camp. As soon as the murder of this Jewish woman and her 2 young daughters became known, sweets were handed out on the streets of Askar as an expression of happiness and triumph. The funeral of Hassan Katanani, the terrorist who pulled the gun on the D family, grew into a huge rally of support, which consisted of everyone from the Askar refugee camp as they celebrated the murder of Jews and the destruction of Israel.
مين بطل المخيم؟
حسن القطراني.
ليه؟
سوى عملية لأنه أول شيء دافع عن وطنه وعن كرامته، رجع شوية من الكرامة لما هجرونا من ديورنا وبيوتنا وسيطروا على أراضينا.
مين هدول؟
إبراهيم النابلسي ووديع الحواح وعبد الله الحصري أحمد السعدي.
مين هدول؟
استشهد.
إيه؟
كل مخيم أبطال، في صالح صبرا وفي معاذ المصري وفي حسن القطناني وفي كتير شهداء عسكر.
ونعطي لأخوتنا المقاومين نهديهم سلام والله يحمي كل واحد مقاوم. تحية لكتيبة عسكر وكتيبة جنين وكتيبة بلاطة. هذا عمي الله يرحمه استشهد 2022 28/10/2022.
وين استشهد وكيف استشهد؟
عملية على حشيش حوارة.
Posters with pictures of the killers were plastered in every corner of Oscar, while songs of praise for the murderers were composed in their honor. Oscar's UNRWA summer camps were even named for these murderers.
صورة البطل إبراهيم النابلسي لأنه كان مرعب، كان مش مطارد، كان يطارد. إني بحب إبراهيم لأنه يعني كان قدوة لكل شباب نابلس، كان قدوة لكل أطفال نابلس.
صورة الشهيد البطل عبد الله الحصري، أرعب كيان وغتم ومدمرهم، أسير وجريح وشهيد. أنا حبيته عشان كان مقاوم ودافع عن وطنه.
The family of Hassan Katanani was congratulated with pride and approval that their son had the honor to kill a Jewish woman and her 2 young daughters while driving in their car to meet family members during the Passover holiday. They expressed their hope and wish that the terrorists' young children would go in the footsteps of their father and merit to become holy shaheed, just like their blessed father. The terrorist mother expressed herself in her own way.
احنا لازم نقتلهم في بلادنا، في عيالنا، في أظافرنا، ناكلهم بسناننا ناكلهم اليهود. هم أعدائنا بالأول والآخر اليهود.
الله يكرمني وأربيهم هالأولاد يطلعوا زي ما بده ربنا إن شاء الله. يكونوا من حفظة القرآن من الصالحين البارين إن شاء الله. مجاهدين في سبيل الله كمان. كنا بالنهاية على هالدرب يعني الجهاد واجب علينا. الحمد لله على كل حال.
Memorial ceremonies for holy martyrs and festivals celebrate the release of terrorists from prison at weddings and family celebrations accompanied by shooting rifles and pistols. Hundreds of Oscar youth take part in these ceremonies, including children and young adolescents, absorbing the message of blind hatred so that they too can become the killers and shaheeds of the future. The amount of weapons in the Oscar refugee camp are huge. Oscar now boasts at least 200 wanted terrorists just waiting to commit the next acts of murder. This is how the right of return, the reason for being of UNRWA, has become a source of lethal violence that surpasses the organization's hollow slogans for peace. The time has come for donor nations to think again about blind support for UNRWA.
Okay, just to show you, this is a relatively new video that David Bedeen has helped produce for us. I told you he knows how to operate behind the scenes, find the right people to send in and get people to talk on camera exactly how they feel and then present it to the world. But we had a terror attack in Jerusalem this morning. It was actually 2 brothers from East Jerusalem and another at a checkpoint down, I think, in the Jordan Valley, a car ramming this afternoon. While there's a ceasefire in Gaza that's teetering, it may end within the next 24, 48 hours. Hamas has stepped up terror attacks in the West Bank, and this is one of the hubs of their terror activity that is run by UNRWA, a UN agency that has perpetuated the refugee problem from 1948. Again, David, every other refugee problem in the world since 1950, when the UN Commission, High Commission for Refugees was created, within 2 or 3 years, the goal is either resettle them, absorb them in the current country, resettle them in a third country, or repatriation somewhere else. That your aim is to get them off the refugee rolls within 2 to 3 years. Here is a refugee problem treated differently than each other, self-perpetuating and always growing. And UNRWA says we are obligated to follow the curriculum of the local authorities. That's their excuse for why their schools for Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank, in Gaza, are full of not one word of peace, all preparing the next generation for war and martyrdom against Israel.
The way in which they got away with that, by the way, was the various of the century people in the Israel peace movement made assurances that they checked the books and they were for peace. Well, there was a peace curriculum for the Palestinian Authority and for UNRWA, but we interviewed the guy who started that peace curriculum, and he said, good news and bad news. Good news, there's a peace curriculum. Bad news, we're not allowed to use it. Now, what's very important to understand in terms of nuances, there's no ceasefire and has been no ceasefire. Okay, there is a hudna. A hudna is a temporary respite in Islamic tradition, and if you want to break it, you can. That's the difference between a ceasefire or an armistice and the hudna. And the media is complicit. All the governments in the world are being complicit with broadcasting the lie that it's a ceasefire. There is no ceasefire and has been no ceasefire. There is a state of war, and that's very important to understand. So when
Even,
people say,
Israel is calling it a pause or something. They don't want something more long-lasting. They want to get back to fighting and eliminating Hamas. Yeah,
the mainstream media have been saying ceasefire, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, tell us, UNRWA has 30,000 employees. It is the largest UN agency of all of them, probably by far. But they're split between Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Do you know in Gaza how many employees there and how many are loyalists of Hamas?
First of all, Hamas won the workers' union overwhelmingly, by 92% in their last election. So that's not an issue.
This is the employees' union for UNRWA.
That's correct.
Teachers and others.
Now, every nation that gives money to UNRWA could say, okay, we'll give you the money on the condition that you have no terrorists. And the leading countries are the U.S., but the U.S. money has been, as I mentioned before, has been put in escrow. It's not being used because there's a contract between the U.S. and UNRWA that they can't get more funds unless they change the curriculum. They haven't gotten more funds. They're not getting them. They're not changing their curriculum. They're not getting more funds. But Germany is now the leading exponent, and Germany just recently communicated some misinformation, which your viewers need to know. Germany said we're cutting off UNRWA. Well, UNRWA passes only Germany funds UNRWA through 12 nonprofit organizations. In other words, they don't do, most of it is not directly, and it is not direct funding, and it's continuing completely. It's completely in tandem with what they were going to give them, which is $300 million.
Mm-hmm. When you have 30,000 employees, the vast majority are Palestinian refugees themselves. They live in these camps and they're running their local affairs, their schools and everything else. And there's just a layer at the top, senior leaders of, say, Europeans or whatever, leftist do-gooders. But they've been complaining that in Gaza, they've had over 100 UNRWA employees killed by Israel in the fighting in Gaza, doing a lot of complaining about it. But aren't most of these Hamas?
They're either Hamas or Fatah or Islamic Jihad, but they're terrorists. That's what's most important to understand. There's no issue here with what the identity in our book. As I mentioned, we have the roadblock to peace. We profile 50 of the people who were killed from UNRWA, every one of whom was a terrorist, very, very clearly. Now, what used to be, when I started working on this project in 1987, the majority of workers were actually European or American or whatever. Coming from my hometown of Philadelphia, the American Friends Service Committee provided a very high percentage of the workers at the time.
The Quakers.
In February, the Quakers, correct. In February 1988, there was an overthrow of those workers, and it became completely Palestinian. Not only completely Palestinian, but it was handed over to the PLO, and then the PLO more or less handed over to Hamas. And Hamas was viewed as some kind of a religious organization that, you don't worry about them. They're just religious. They're not going to be serious about terrorism. But they have actually taken the terrorism to another level, because they do it within the concept of Islam. So that it's not only right of return for Allah by force of arms, very important, and the inculcation, the indoctrination every morning. Every child wakes up in the morning and repeats the mantra that he's going back to where he came from, and by force of arms. Now, the donor nations, many of you have people who come from the donor nations who are watching this program right now. The U.S., I've mentioned before that so far they're holding back. Canada, the UK, Germany, All the countries in Scandinavia, and every one of them could make a condition. Now, we went to the Swedish ambassador, by the way, and the Swedish ambassador looked at our material, looked at the curriculum, and he said it was fake. No, he said it was fake. I said, this is fake. Do you think that I have a laboratory here, a laboratory here who is producing these books? No, but again, his name is Olenberg, and he has to be confronted, and all the other ambassadors. Now, the other issue, which is very, very important. Now, I'm a social worker by profession, as you've admitted, I've admitted, and a social work professional looks at the balance of books and also the issue of transparency and accountability. Well, most of the money comes in cash. And with most of the money coming in cash, there's no real accountability for what happens to the money. And we have proposed that we're looking for support for a major private investigation of UNRWA to see what happens to that money. UNRWA is also one of the leaders in the world of sex trafficking. And that's something that I don't want to even mention in a document until we can document it and show exactly what's going on. And we have sources ready to put out a report. So the UN, which is known for its sins in sex trafficking, can also include UNRWA in the next report. Very important. The UNRWA is also one of the centers for the export of arms and munition, narcotics. The very, very important happens when you don't oversee it. Now, the country of Qatar, however you pronounce it, Qatar, has been exporting cash to UNRWA, and who knows what happens with the cash? This has to be followed up. We worked with a senior medical professional for 20 years, who meanwhile has passed away, Dr. Eli Lash, who was the head of medical services in Gaza, who documented at the time that medical equipment donated to Gaza disappears and is sold on the open market as are medications. Now, the UNRWA people are always complaining that they don't have enough medical equipment and enough cash, enough medicine. Now, we're talking about a budget of $1.6 billion without accountability. That should be a scandal in any society, including the Middle East countries, where sometimes there may be some thievery or whatever, but not on this scale. It's very important to understand there's no accountability, no transparency, and it's the job of the people of the donations. You may not know this, but in 1991, there was a Madrid peace conference, which the RWG, the Refugee Working Group, was established to oversee what happens to the money and to plan a future for the Palestinian Arab refugees. Well, then the Oslo process came, and the Oslo process, which started in '93, completely neglected the issue of the refugees. They were left on the side, and the architects of the plan will say, we'll work it out, it'll be okay. Well, it's not okay. And when you hear that of the 2.2 million people in Gaza, 2 million of them are from the UNRWA camps without a future, except the only future UNRWA gives them is you can go back to where you came from. Oh, to homes that do not exist. There's something wrong with, I don't need a social work degree to know there's something rotten in Denmark, or at least in Gaza.
Yeah. This is very troubling. The teachers union, the workers unions in UNRWA vote majority with Hamas. I saw a report that 85% of the UNRWA employees in Gaza are either members or loyalists of Hamas in their vision of radical Islamic jihad war.
Actually, 92%, and this 92%. And when they
in the teacher in the union, the workers union, 92% voted for Hamas.
In 2009, the Canadian government established our report, looked over our report on that issue, which we did for the European Parliament, and decided that they would pull out money from the UNRWA General Fund. Well, when Trudeau was elected in 2015, he reversed it. We asked Trudeau, the Trudeau government, did you see anything new? And we have never gotten an answer on that question.
No, this really gets into the problem. There's even reports that UNRWA teachers in Gaza have been holding Israeli hostages in their homes over the last 2 months.
Correct, and the donor people who are from any of the donor nations. The donor nations are listed on our site. They're also listed by UNRWA itself. You can make an issue out of it. You know, I worked. One of my supervisors, a man named Eliezer Jaffe, may he rest in peace, used to say, "A problem is a problem when someone makes it into a problem. All it takes is one person who's watching this telecast, this webinar, to make an issue out of it. A letter to Guterres at the United Nations. We found him to be responsive, his staff to be responsive, but no one's making complaints. And he actually ordered UNRWA to take this book off the shelves, and they took it off and put it back in. Why? Because there's not enough feedback from people. Now, that's one of the problems we face.
I think this gets us to the real heart of the problem, the core of the issue. Is UNRWA and the wider United Nations organs network itself, is it complicit in the massacres and the atrocities committed on October 7th in the Western Negev inside Israel?
I would say, without being too self-centered, that if the movies we made of UNRWA had been properly looked at, we made 4 presentations at the UN itself, and we've been in the European Parliament, the German Bundestag, the Swedish Parliament, the American Congress, and the Canadian Parliament. If people had looked at our site, they would have seen in our movies the children simulate attacks on kibbutzim on the border there. They simulate in their school plays murders of Jews, slitting their throats, etc. And on September 27th of this year, not long before the big attack took place, we brought our experts to meet with ambassadors, with consuls, and with senior people in Israeli intelligence, and we warned them. We warned them what was about to happen. There was one takeaway sentence which can be used to this day: disarm UNRWA. UNRWA has become an arsenal of weaponry. Now, a senior official of the Israel Foreign Ministry wasn't aware of it. We then showed him our movie, and he was aghast. But the others have also been aghast, but they haven't done anything about it. We need people to say, "Excuse me, why should schools in a United Nations education system be filled with weapons and with armaments? And they should be removed, and that would save lives. And that's something that would save lives tomorrow morning. There's right now a respite in the fighting. Fine, let's get rid of the arms, and let's have orders to get rid of the arms from the donor nations. You don't have to be either pro or anti-Israel. It's not a pro or anti-Israel issue. This is a matter of saving lives.
Yeah. So far, one IDF officer in Gaza said, to find arms and weapons, rockets, all we have to do is go to the hospitals, the mosques, and the schools, and it's easy to find them. And there's hardly a school they've been to so far where they have not found weapons. But as I understand it, from the age of 5, you are already trained, the young boys are already trained in handling weapons in the UNRWA schools.
Well, you can see on our site a movie we made called UNRWA Child Soldiers, and I don't want to correct you, but we found from the age of 9.
9. Okay.
That's what the commander said, from the age of 9. They have to go through a little bit of puberty, I guess. But the point is, the issue is using child soldiers is one of the rubrics of United Nations laws, that you're not allowed to do that. Can I please have someone object to that? Let alone how women have been treated in the last few weeks, and with only a whimper of a sound. What happened to all these feminist women's movements? What's going on here? Anyway, let's go back to UNRWA. We can focus our energies. $1.6 billion from 67 nations, 33 nonprofit organizations. By the way, we've checked. Those nonprofit organizations that help UNRWA can be sued. They can be sued for making this book. UNRWA can't be sued because they're a United Nations agency. But when Manchester United or something like, and they're amongst the donors, they can be sued for what they've done. It's called complicity with murder. And that's something to take very seriously.
Yeah, no, I just think that the head of UNRWA is this Philip Lazzarini?
Lazzarini.
Lazzarini is Italian or something?
No, he's actually from the German section of Suez.
Okay, well he
doesn't know anything about anything. He denies everything I've just told you, and that's we have to make him responsible.
Yeah, and I've heard some vicious rumors about
him. We got rid of a previous UNRWA director when I asked him in a press conference at the UNRWA policy conference in 2004, I asked him a simple question: how can you account for Hamas being on your staff? His answer was, I don't check the religious credentials of my staff. Well, that was broadcast around the world, and he was fired. I feel terrible for causing stress to that gentleman, and he was without salary and without a way of making a living. Poor guy. But that's the kind of thing that has to come. And the UNRWA headquarters in Jerusalem, which is 150 meters from the Israel police quarters, sometimes one of my themes to keep my sanity is to remember that as I grew up, I read Mad Magazine, and Mad Magazine used to say, well, you can't make these things up. And that's what this is all about.
And they also said, what me worry.
Well, there you go.
But I worry about these things. I look, the head of UNRWA, the head of the High Commissioner for Refugee, he's not supposed to be dealing with this, but he's in there. The World Health Organization, all the UN Secretary General himself, all screaming bloody murder against Israel, genocide, no medicines, humanitarian catastrophe. But I believe what the IDF is uncovering there, they're worried that it is proof of the UN itself being complicit in creating this culture of death in Gaza, where so many are brainwashed into glorifying martyrdom, into jihad, the whole Hamas agenda. Why isn't the UN complicit in this? And you're saying you can't sue them, but you can sue some of the funders, some of the private funders. What about other countries?
Yeah, in all the countries, no country can be sued. The 33 relief agencies can be sued. I have the list in front of me of the 33 agencies. You've got the UNRWA Spanish Committee. You've got the Qatar Charity, the Foundation to Promote Open Society, the Norwegian Refugee Council, RADR Australia, Handicapped International, the Kuwait Red Crescent Society. They all have people here in Israel, and they can
they all sound nice and helpful and humane, but corrupt.
I'm glad you mentioned WHO, the World Health Organization. It's actually a tongue-in-cheek story. The person who was running the medical services in Gaza for the civil administration, his name was Dr. Eli Lesh. And he used to say that he must be working for the Mossad because no one knows what he did. What do you mean? He's the guy who got the award from the World Health Organization for reducing infant mortality in Gaza to almost nothing. And he says, this is the best kept secret. I must be working for the Mossad. And some people said, well, why don't you just let them die? He says, my name is Dr. Eli Lesh, not Mengele.
Yeah. And what are the chances that UNRWA is just going to be allowed to continue its role in Gaza? Will there be reforms?
It's up to the people watching this program. I want to be very clear about something. A problem is a problem when someone makes it into a problem. If 10 people in the world were to demand that UNRWA go through a process of change of policy, this would reverberate all over the place. So far, people say, "Oh, that's the way it is." That's not the way it is. My kippah is not only because of my bald spot, but I have a belief in that God does listen, and it can be changed. These things can be changed if people wake up and do something about it. If you just want to sit in in the gallery, in the box office, what did they have in baseball? The people who are in the first row of the box seats, sitting there and not doing anything about it. That's the problem. Get active. Find out, verify if what David Bedin has just said to you is true. Ask questions of the foreign relations committees of each of the nations we've been to. They're all sensitive to it, and that's the issue. They've worked. UNRWA has 3 public relations firms working to try to denigrate yours truly in terms of what I'm telling you. This is not only my issue, but it should be everyone's issue. The fact that 5.5 million people are educated with the idea of the right of return by force of arms, and not to hate Jews, but to kill Jews. That's one of the most important things to emphasize. It's not, I don't, after 36 years of working in this subject, I don't find there's an atmosphere of hatred. There's an atmosphere of murder. Robert Wistrich, may he rest in peace, who was a scholar of the Holocaust, he sat in this office, combed through the school books, and they combed through Nazi school books. There's no comparison. The Nazis try to cover up what they're doing. They say it very openly in terms of what they don't hide it. It's just, you know, they have eyes and they will not see. That says in the book of Psalms. You know, people have ears and they will not listen. All we need is 10 people in the world I had two grandfathers named Abraham, so that's cool. 10 people in the world who will make an issue out of this, and it can change.
We need a minion of 10 righteous.
Afraid of getting feedback, and that what you have to do is give feedback based on this material. And if you think this movie you just saw was unique, look at the 24 other movies we have on our site. Each one is worse than the other.
Okay, we need a minion of 10 righteous to get active on this issue. If people want to know more, your site is IsraelBehindTheNews.com.
IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and you'll also see how you can contribute. We get no money from any government at any time. We get support for our movies and our investigations only from private individuals, and it's been very tough because no government really wants us to succeed because it messes up the status quo. But it's been very tough over the years, especially this past year. And people say, "Oh, everyone knows." Well, people do not know. And the reason why we bought 100 copies of this school book is that we can give it to people of influence. Very important, because who would imagine that a school book for a United Nations school system, whose theme is peace is here, that they would actually have a manual on how to murder Jews with a murderer as the role model. That's nonsense. I haven't got a wild imagination since you heard that I read Mad Magazine as I grew up. I have a wild imagination, but this is not imagination.
Yeah. Okay, the website is IsraelBehindTheNews.com. You can make a donation there. You can get all the information to become an activist, to go to your country's leaders and ask them to challenge this corrupt and even criminally complicit UNRWA organization. The Palestinian kids need an education, they need care, they need help. But as long as Fatah or Hamas are running the show, it is just going to be used to raise another generation of terrorists. And we've already seen evidence of it today in the terror attacks here in Jerusalem and Jordan Valley and what's going on in Gaza.
One more important comment. People say, "Why don't you just get rid of UNRWA?" Maybe I'd like to nuke UNRWA, who knows? But you can't, there's what you can do and what you can't do. What we can do is advocate for policy change. It's not UNRWA, the United Nations is not going to get rid of UNRWA. But when we meet diplomats and say, do you think that the issue of teaching murder should be changed? The answer is yes.
Okay. Well, David, we thank you for your time looking at UNRWA, a facilitator of Hamas. Very, very good information and a call to action as well, and an appeal for funding to help continue exposing this work. I think it's a very important way to push back at the UN itself for the way it treats Israel. It is a weak spot for them. It is atrocious, morally degenerate, if you ask me, and we need to be more active on it and raise our voices. We thank David Badin for being with us today. Remember, you can share this and watch it again on the Christian Embassy's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. And yesterday we talked to Dr. Mordechai Kadar on the future of Gaza and really great insights on Hamas. Today, David Badin on UNRWA, Facilitator of Hamas. We'll be back next week with more interesting webinars. And just at the top of the hour at 4 o'clock, we'll have our daily global prayer gathering with Christian leaders and prayer warriors from all over the world. Join us then. Thank you for being with us. and shalom from Jerusalem.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.